videos each week, just testimony videos of people in their lives, of how God has changed their life. I'm just going to tell you up front, the message I'm preaching today is not the message I had planned on preaching. As we go into a series, I often at least have some direction of what I feel like God wants us to cover or say. And this week I knew what we were going to do. I told Joey and I told him yesterday, don't hate me, because he always tries to sort of match up the music with the message. And I said, I've changed the message, so whether or not it matches the music is not your fault, it's my fault. But don't hate me when I get up there and you're going, that isn't what you told me. So I asked for his forgiveness yesterday. But just because of the events of this week, and the events that have happened in the last several months in our country, this week as I began to sit down and start the message I thought I was going to preach, God began to steer me in another direction. And I do believe God honors planning and preparation, but I do believe there's times when God says, whoa boy, go over here. Do this, say this. And so that's what I'm sort of doing today. This is not the message I have been planning for several weeks to preach. And so if you don't like it, talk to him and not me. Okay? If you just think I should have stuck with the other, whatever, you talk to God about that, and I'll let him talk to you about that. We are doing this series called Believe. And as we've been doing this, we started at Easter Sunday by just asking the question, what do you believe about Easter? Because the reality of this series and the reality of life is what you believe about Easter really boils down to what you believe about yourself, what you believe about God, what you believe about Jesus and the resurrection. Because there's some people that think Easter is just to get Good Friday off of work. There's some people that think Easter is just a chance to get more chocolate candy to restock the Valentine's basket, that is now empty. You have to restock that at Easter. So there's people that believe a lot of different things about Easter. And so we asked the question, what do you believe about Easter? The week after that, we asked ourselves, what do you believe about heaven? And let me tell you, that was a great message. And we were all encouraged, because the point of that whole week was no matter what you believe about heaven, it isn't nearly as good as it's going to be. I mean, you can close your eyes and draw this incredible picture out there and just think of what heaven's going to be like, and your mind cannot even come close to the reality of what it's going to be. Last week we talked about what do you believe about hell? And as great as the week before was probably as horrific as last week was, because the point was the same. No matter how bad you think hell may be, it's going to be so much more worse than you can imagine. And here's what I find interesting. As we get into this message, you're going to see how this sort of plays out. We had an incredible attendance the week we talked about what do you believe about heaven. Incredible. And can I tell you, the week we talked about, and nobody knew, but the week we talked about what do you believe about hell, we had our lowest attendance of the year. Now let me tell you what I believe about that. I believe that Satan does not want you to know the truth about hell, because if he can keep it out of your sight and out of your mind and out of your periphery, then you'll just keep plugging along like you've been plugging along all of these years. And I believe last week, I fully believe there was excuses and there were reasons and there were problems and there were situations, all just created to keep people from hearing that message last week. And so that's where we've come up, and this is week 4 of this series. And what I want to talk about today is, what do you believe about the good, the bad, and the ugly of life? What do you believe about the good, the bad, and the ugly of life? Our sort of byline or our mantra for this series is, what you believe will reflect your past, represent your present, and guide your future, unless you change what you believe. Pick any topic you want. Pick politics. Pick finances. In fact, I thought about this just while I was sitting down there. My dad raised me. He said, son, you never quit a job till you have a job. He said, you're quitting on Friday at this job, but you're starting on Monday at this other job. You never quit a job till you have a job. And for my life, I was that way. Even when I got in ministry, it wasn't like I just walked into a pastor and said, hey, I think I'm going to just not have a job anymore for a while and go find something else. No, I mean, when I came to Georgia, I knew I was coming to Georgia before I told the people in Virginia we were leaving. I mean, I was just raised with that mentality. You don't quit a job till you have a job. Until the day God called me to start a church. See, when you start a church, you're starting something that don't even exist yet. So when I walked in to talk to my former church, that what God had called us to do, I really quit a job without having a job. But what happened? I changed what I believed. My dad had raised me to believe this, live this, and I lived about 38 years with that mentality. And then over the course of time, God began to change what I believe to the point that I was able to walk in and say, I have to quit this, even though I don't know what this is over here yet. And you can pick any topic you want to. Politics, family life, marriage life, education, finances. And if you realize it and run it through that sifter, probably what you believe about all of those topics and all of those situations sort of came from your parents. They trained you, they raised you, they showed you, they modeled for you. And some of those things are great. And then some of those things are off skew. And you'll just continue to do that thing. And live that way and do that thing until maybe you change what you believe. So today the question is, what do you believe about the good, the bad, and the ugly of life? I believe if we went out on the streets, sort of a man on the street took a microphone and said, what do you believe about this? What do you believe about, this week, what do you believe about these bombings in Boston? What do you believe about this explosion at the fertilizer factory in Texas? What do you believe about the earthquake? What do you believe about, and we ask that, almost every answer would come back in one of 5 categories. And here's what I want to say to you. I'm going to cover it real quickly, but I think you and I would be the same way too. Here's those 5 categories. In fact, if you were lucky enough to get a bulletin today, because I feel pretty sure we ran out pretty quick, but if you were lucky enough to get a bulletin, there's a place in there you could take some notes. And here are the 5 categories of belief on the good, the bad, and the ugly of life. The first one is God caused it. Some people have the mentality and have the belief that God orchestrates everything. That God orchestrates everything. That God orchestrates the good. That God orchestrates the bad. That God orchestrates the ugly. We see baby Aaron and we say, God brought that life into this world. God put Aaron with Tucker and Marissa. But then some people have the mentality when they're depressed and battling depression that, well, God has just caused me to be depressed. God has just stolen my joy. God has just crushed my dreams. Or we watch those bombings and there are people who were saying, in fact, even at 9/11, there were people who would go on the television and say, well, that's just God's judgment. God brought it on so to judge the United States. And so there's one mentality that says God causes everything. There's another mentality that says God allowed it. In other words, God knew it, but He didn't intervene. And sometimes we struggle with that. How could God know that was going to happen, but didn't intervene? In fact, I go back to the good, and I'll keep using Aaron as an example. But that, the birth of a baby is a great and glorious thing. But then, then Marissa's probably going, well, why didn't God make it painless? And then you get a couple weeks in, it's like, then why can't God make him go to sleep? Why can't God use Febreze or something down there? Why don't we have an internal Febreze going on? But we do that and we say, well, God knows all of this is happening. God knows He's keeping me awake tonight. God knows this, but He's allowing it. Why would He allow it? We ask ourselves, why won't my problems go away? God, you know my problems. God, you know why my kids don't act right. God, you know my career's not going right. God, you know my finances are a mess. Why won't you fix all of that? And we have that mentality of God knows it. Why won't He intervene? Why won't He fix it for us? And that's another mentality that a lot of us have. We see a tragedy. And I've thought all this week, there's no other word that can go with all of these events than tragedy. We see the Sandy Hook shootings. We see the bombing in Boston. We see the explosion in Texas. We see the earthquake. We see all of these things. And there's no other word that really encapsulates all those things other than tragedy. And we see these tragedies happen and we say, well, why didn't God intervene? Why didn't God stop that? He had to know about it. We see about Adam and Eve and their sin. Why didn't God just make the snake shut up? Why wasn't the apple just rotten? Why wouldn't we just run through all of these scenarios? We look at the story, if you've read the book, the story of Joseph in the Old Testament, and you say, well, why didn't God do something to his brothers? I mean, his brothers were so mean to him. His brothers were trying to dog him out and sell him out to slavery. Why didn't God do something to them? And it's just this idea of God knew that it was going to happen. Why didn't He intervene in it? And then we look at our own lives and we look at those situations and we say, God, you know the mess I'm in. Why won't you fix it? The third category of belief that a lot of people have is that Satan caused it. In fact, what a lot of people believe is anything good that happened, God caused. Anything bad happened, Satan caused. And so we have that belief. And so anytime something good happens in our lives, we just say, oh, well, God did that. And then anytime something bad happens in our life, we'll go, oh, well, Satan must have done that. But if you read throughout the Bible, God was very good in His creation of when He created the world. But then sin entered into the world. But then God brought the flood to clear the world. We read about the Battle of Jericho where the walls crush in and just kill people. And so sometimes we have this idea that anything good that happened, God did, and anything bad happened, Satan did. It's this idea that Satan orchestrates everything. And then you're smart enough to know that the fourth category is that Satan allowed it. In other words, Satan knew about it, but he didn't do anything to stop it. I have a niece who right now is serving with a missions organization, and they're based out of Texas, and they go regularly, monthly, into the Middle East. And in the Middle East, when we think of let's go to missions, we think of let's go somewhere safe, let's go somewhere nice, let's go somewhere comfortable. Well, in the Middle East, there is none of that. And they go into the Middle East and they minister to people and they reach people. And she's always posted pictures on Facebook of someone who's a new believer, someone who's a new follower. And so some people say, well, why is Satan allowing that to happen? Why is Satan not intervening there? And then the fifth category is this: none of the above. And that's the person who just thinks it all just sort of happens. There's karma. In the end, it's the end. And, you just make your own way. And then whatever happens, you do. And they're just sort of willy-nilly. Nobody's in charge. Nobody causes. Nobody allows. Nobody makes anything to happen. Now, here's what I want to tell you. For answers 1 through 4, all of those are true at different times of life. All of those are true. 5 is never true. And our problem that you and I struggle with is this. We try to take every situation like this, and we try to put it in one of those 4 categories. We do. Hey, we sit there and we look at a situation maybe in our own lives or maybe a national situation, and all of us, we try to put it in one of those 4 categories. Well, God must have caused that to happen. Like I said, after 9/11, so many people, religious people, came out and were just spouting that God caused it to bring judgment on the United States. They don't know. But the problem that you and I struggle with is we go through these situations, whether they're good or whether they're bad or whether they're these ugly situations. What we try to do is we try to put them in one of those 4 categories. And what I want to propose to you today is that we need to stop trying to put them in the categories and maybe start living by these 4 principles that I want to teach you here for just a minute. 4 principles that I want to teach you about life. Here's the first principle. The earthly cannot understand the eternal. The earthly cannot understand the eternal, and we try to. When a situation happens, we try to figure out what was God thinking, what was God doing. I can remember as an 18-year-old, my grandfather dying instantly after just having a physical, and the doctor telling him, you should live 20 more years. And I'd just been bowling with him that day. And that night he died of a massive heart attack. And I remember as an 18-year-old just saying, how could that happen? God, why would that happen? And I couldn't figure it out, but I was trying to stick it into one of those categories. Only to find out later that his brother-in-law, who was older than him, accepted Christ at his funeral and died in less than 6 months from cancer that he didn't even know he had. So it took me a while to figure out, okay, well maybe God did that to draw him into the funeral service, to hear the preacher preach, to accept Christ, because God knew his life was getting ready to end, even though he didn't know his life was getting ready to end. So the earthly cannot fully understand the eternal. Isaiah 55:9 says, "For just as the heavens are higher than the earth, so my ways are higher than your ways, and my thoughts are higher than your thoughts." What God says here is not his opinion, it is a fact. He says, my ways are higher than your ways. We think we're seeing the big picture? No, he sees the big picture. We look at a situation, we look at something that happens, and we look at it maybe in terms of weeks or months or years. God's looking at that same situation in terms of decades, in terms of lifetimes. He says, my ways are higher than your ways, and my thoughts are higher than your thoughts. And so one of the principles you need to live with and know and understand and accept is that you cannot always understand what each situation is. Ephesians 2:2 says, you used to live in sin like the rest of the world, obeying the devil, the commander of the powers in the unseen world. He is the spirit at work in the hearts of those who refuse to obey God. So just as God is at work all the time, Satan is at work all the time as well. There's no clearer picture than this than in the book of Job and the story of Job. Listen to these few verses out of Job chapter 1. It says, one day the members of the heavenly courts came to present themselves before the Lord, and the accuser Satan came with them. Where have you come from? The Lord asked Satan. Satan answered the Lord, I have been patrolling the earth, watching everything that's going on. Then the Lord asked Satan, have you noticed my servant Job? He is the finest man in all the earth. He is blameless, a man of complete integrity. He fears God and he stays away from evil. Satan replied to the Lord, yeah, but Job has good reason to fear the Lord. You've always put a wall of protection around him and his home and his property. You've made him prosperous in everything he does. Look how rich he is. But reach out and take everything he has, and he will surely curse you to your face. God says, all right, you may test him. The Lord said to Satan, do whatever you want with him, whatever he possesses, but do not harm him physically. So Satan left from the Lord's presence. Here's what happened in that situation. God allowed it, and Satan caused it. If you read on in chapter 2 and 3 and 4, what you find out is Satan goes and takes every possession he has. His family is killed. His cattle are dead. All the possessions that make him rich are gone and wasted. And even after the first wave of attacks by Satan, Job does not waver. And so Satan even goes back to him and says, yeah, but he's still healthy. Let me mess with him a little bit, and he will curse you. And so God says, okay. And so Satan goes back to Job, and he puts sores on him and that are painful and agony. And he says, but Job never wavers. And then Job's friends come along. And you know what Job's friends do? Job's friends come along and say, man, you must have really done something bad. God must really be punishing you for what you've done. For some reason, your family must have been unfaithful. You must have cursed God. You must have turned your back. You must be doing some bad stuff for God to do all of this to you. You see, they were putting it in a category for Job. A category that was wrong. It wasn't God that was doing it, but it was God that allowed it. So in this situation, God allowed it and Satan caused it, but everybody around thought Job had done something against God. All the while God was proving to everyone else how faithful a servant Job was. So the earthly cannot understand the eternal. And if you try to, you will drive yourself crazy trying to figure every situation out. Here's the second principle of life. Satan wants to turn everything into a tragedy. Satan wants to take everything and turn it into a tragedy, whether it's a good situation, a bad situation, or an ugly situation. Now, I wrote some things down here, just some examples. God set creation and Satan brought along an apple. Moses went to get the 10 Commandments, and Satan brought along a golden calf. God put David in power, and Satan brought Bathsheba along. God sent Christ, and Satan brought the Pharisees. God sent the cross, and Satan sent death. Fortunate for us, it didn't end there, because God sent the resurrection, and Satan sent Saul. God spread the gospel, and Satan sent persecution. God converted Saul into Paul, and Satan sent prisons. Satan wants to take any situation in your life and turn it into a tragedy. I have some examples here. 2013, God sees a wedding. Satan sees a courtroom. God sees a job. Satan sees a reason for greed. God sees a home and a family, and Satan sees an excuse to skip church. God sent Aaron to Tucker and Marissa, but can I tell you, Satan sees a wedge. You see, Satan just looks at that situation and that family and go, okay, a little sleep deprivation, some doctor bills. I can use that little fella to just wedge in between Tucker and Marissa. Satan wants to take any situation, whether good or bad or ugly, and make a tragedy out of it. Always. Here's the third sign, the third principle that you could live by. God can turn tragedy into triumph. Like I said, when I was thinking this week of the Sandy Hook thing and the bombings and on Monday and the earthquake and the fertilizer explosion, the only word to really sum all of those up is tragedy. You can't come up with a different word because it's tragic. Loss of life. I didn't see this interview, but somebody said that they were interviewing one of the guys and said that the bombing guy from Monday came up and set his book bag down right where the guy was, and he said the guy stood up and looked him just straight in the eyes for like a long period of time and then just walked off. And that guy stood there, obviously, because the race was still going on. He was there watching. And the explosion happened, and it took both of his legs off. You can't describe that with any other word than tragic. But what you need to know is that God can turn any tragedy into triumph. Romans 8:28 says, and we know that God causes everything to work together for the good of those who love God and are called according to His purpose. I have down here, Satan sees a famine and God sees a reason to trust Him. Satan sees strife and God sees a chance for healing. Satan sees evil and God sees a chance for grace to intervene. Satan sees bombings and God sees a chance for His hope to support and encourage a nation. Joseph said in Genesis 50 verse 20, he says, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it all for good. He brought me to this position so I could save the lives of many people." If I could put a parenthesis there, I would have said, even you. Joseph saved the life of the brothers who tried to kill him. Of the brothers who sold him into slavery, Joseph saved their life. God can take any tragedy and turn it into triumph. In Job's case, where Satan had taken everything from him, Job remained faithful, and in the end, God replaced every single thing Job had lost twice. If he lost 100 cattle, he replaced it with 200. If he lost 100 sheep, he replaced it with 200. And the Bible even says that He even gave him the children back. He gave him 7 more children. A chance to turn tragedy into triumph. So what's the key? What is the key today for your life? Because as I look out and I see a lot of faces, I imagine not everything is going 100% your way in your life right now. I imagine some of us are in some situations. And they may not be tragic. They may not be horrific. Obviously, we weren't involved. And here's how close this hits home. I knew a guy who ran that Boston Marathon last year. He lives right here in Perry. Teaches at the high school. And yet last year he was there running that race. How close could it have been for all of us to be sitting there going, oh, what happened to him? So I don't know what's going on in your life, but here's what it comes down to is this. Daily faith is needed regardless of any situation. There are people who live with what I call heaven faith. They think they have enough faith to think that God will get them into heaven one day when they die, but they do not have enough faith to let God rule their life while they live day in and day out. Somehow they think that when they die, God can get them to heaven, but God can't handle their situation today. God can't handle their finances today. God can't handle their marriage today. God can't handle their kids today. And what it takes to live in this life and to live even among tragedy is to have a daily faith in Christ. A daily faith in Christ. Listen to Hebrews chapter 11. It says faith is the confidence that what we hope for will actually happen. It gives us assurance about things we cannot see. Through their faith, the people in the days of old earned a good reputation. By faith, we understand that the entire universe was formed at God's command. That we now see did not come from anything that can be seen. It was by faith that Abel brought a more acceptable offering to God than Cain did. Abel's offering gave evidence that he was a righteous man, and God showed His approval of all of his gifts. Although Abel is long dead, he still speaks to us by his example of faith. It was by faith that Enoch was taken up to the heaven without dying. He disappeared because God took him. For before he was taken up, he was known as a person who pleased God. And verse 6 is a verse that God always brings me back to. And it is impossible to please God without faith. Anyone who wants to come to Him must believe that God exists and that He rewards those who sincerely seek Him. Without faith, it is impossible to please God. There's a principle you can live by. Without faith, I'm not talking about heaven faith. I'm talking about Monday faith. It is impossible to please God. And can I tell you, so many of us try. Some of us try to work it out. Some of us try to do some good things. Some of us try to give to charity. Some of us try to do a lot of things. But then God says, hey, I want to deal with you about this. And we say, no, God, you need to back off. God, you can have everything but my wallet. God, you can have everything but my home. Without faith, it is impossible to please God. So just whether it's the bombings in Boston, whether it's an explosion in a factory in Texas, or if next week there's a tragedy right here in Perry, what you need to know, what you need to believe about life is that God can turn every tragedy into a triumph. And you need to have the daily faith in that situation. The faith in God. The faith in Christ. Let's pray today.